athlete and neuroscientist this morning, Camp East Shields has the pleasure of welcoming Dr. Peggy Assinck back to camp. When younger, the now national athlete and neuroscientist was an engaged member of the Easter Seals Camp Marywood community. Beginning as a camper, she took part in the Leaders in Training program. She then served as a camp counselor and programmer for 6 consecutive years. Since leaving camp, Peggy has had an array of diverse experiences and has emerged as a distinguished leader in both the parasport and neuroscience communities. Peggy has been representing Team Canada on the women's national sledge hockey team since 2007 and now serves as the team's assistant captain. With women's sledge hockey not included in the Paralympic Games, she's been a strong advocate for the sport from local to global levels and aspires to one day represent Canada at a Paralympic Games. Off the ice, Peggy has devoted herself to researching spinal cord injury and MS. Since earning her PhD in neuroscience, she has received many distinctions for her research and is currently working at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland, where she continues to examine how the brain and spinal cord naturally tries to repair itself and potential treatments after spinal cord injury and MS. Before I hand the stage over to her, I'll just note that if you would like to ask Peggy a question, please do so in the comments on YouTube. I'll be sure to pass those questions along. Camp Easter Seals is extremely proud to welcome Dr. Peggy Assinck back to camp, virtually that is. We look forward to hearing all about her insights and experiences since leaving camp.
Hello, everybody. Firstly, I'd love to just tell you how excited I am to be feeling like I'm at camp, even though I'm streaming here from Scotland in the United Kingdom. So today what I'm going to do is just take you through a little bit of my journey, my life journey, which as far as I can remember, starts in and around camp, to be honest with you. So just to start things off, I'm going to share a little video that will just kind of give you a sense of some of the things that I'm going to talk to you about today. So check this out. I remember being in the hospital and being told from doctors and nurses that there was a lot of things that I could do yesterday that I wasn't going to be able to do in the future. But over time, I really used it as a motivator. My name is Peggy Assinck, and I do research looking at spinal cord injury. In my PhD, what I looked at is 2 things. First, trying to understand how individual cells in the spinal cord respond to spinal cord injury and how they help to contribute to repair. But I also looked at whether or not transplanting cells after spinal cord injury might help result in improved recovery or repair in response to spinal cord injury. I was born with spina bifida. For me, when I was really young, that didn't affect me at all. I was a able-bodied kid, able to play all the different sports. When I was 11 years old was when it really started to affect me. I became paralyzed from my waist down, and I had no idea why. I got rushed to St. Kitts Hospital in Toronto, and at that point, they recognized that I had sustained a non-traumatic spinal cord injury. For me, what that meant is that my function changed all the time. So some days I was a wheelchair user, and some days I was able to walk and had more of an invisible disability. Spending as much time as I did in the hospital, I became really interested in the science behind what was happening for me and how the injury was actually affecting the cells that were resulting in my lack of function. But there was another part of me that still wanted to get back to that athlete side. A rec therapist introduced me to the sport of sledge hockey. At the time, I really loved it because I got to meet other kids with disabilities. And then over time, I started to want to hone my skills and get better and be more competitive within a sport. About 11 years ago, was able to make the women's national sledge hockey team for Canada, and I've been representing them ever since. And now a big part of my life is just helping to support other people with and without physical disabilities to become involved in the sport of sledge hockey. It was important for me to find a way to help improve the quality of life for people who had similar disabilities as myself. I always approached things and recognized that I needed to do them a little bit differently, but that it was always attainable. And that was a really important thing that has brought me to where I am today.
All right, so there we go. So hopefully that was a good introduction to some of the things that I'm going to be speaking with you about today. So what I thought I would do is just share a little bit about me and about my journey as it stood. So as it was mentioned in that video, I was born with spina bifida in a small town close to Peterborough, Ontario. And I was born with quite a large bump on my back, which at the time wasn't identified as spina bifida. It wasn't until I was about 11 years old that I started having issues with coordination, and then suddenly lost a lot of the function from my waist down. And so my younger years, between when I was about 11 years old and about 17 or 18, was actually spent in and out of sick kids hospital. So I did a lot of transitioning from having almost full paralysis from my waist down to having surgery to try and repair it, to using lots of different assistive devices to be able to move around, bracing for my legs, crutches, all those different things. And I had many different surgeries over and over and over again in order to help to repair some of the issues that were associated with being born with spina bifida, even though they didn't actually affect me until quite a bit later. And so this really brings me to camp. And so I was a camper at Marywood for a couple of years, and those were around the years that I was actually having a lot of medical difficulties and I was in and out of the hospital. And I just remember them as being such amazing experiences. It was one of the first times that I had met other kids with physical disabilities because I had lived in such a rural area. So that was really important aspect for me. And I actually chose to come back as an LIT. And so that really gave me a lot of the leadership skills that I felt like I needed to be able to do a lot of the goals that I had in my life, but also to start to think about wanting to give back to the camp as a counselor. And so I actually joined and was a counselor for about 6 years over multiple summers. And I also did some programming. So I ran arts and crafts program for quite a while. And so I just have such fond memories with regards to camp and the campers that I met, the counselors that I met, the amazing experiences that I had. I have memories of having sparkle fights in arts and crafts, which was very fun, and then throwing counselors in the lake when they were covered in sparkles. I also have incredible memories of out tripping. And so for me, I gained a lot of confidence in my ability to camp, even with some of the issues that I had with my physical disability. And those lessons that I learned have really carried me through to today as someone who really enjoys doing out tripping and canoe trips and camping. Those skills really are really important to who I am today. So I just wanted to acknowledge how incredible it is that you guys have online camp this summer. And I'm so excited to be able to have a little bit of time to share a little more about my journey with you. So you saw that I'm quite interested in para ice hockey. And so para ice hockey, now I started playing para ice hockey when I was about 12 years old. So it was very soon after I started having mobility impairment issues. It was the only sport available to me at the time, but it was a sport that allowed for me to, again, get to know other kids with physical disabilities and to get back to sport, which was a really important part of my life. And so over the years, I've actually played for many different club teams because I've moved around quite a bit. So I've played for Peterborough, for Niagara, for Ottawa, and then more recently playing in Vancouver. And so I got to meet lots and lots of really great people through that sporting experience. Now, as was mentioned earlier, I also started to really enjoy the competitive side of the game. And so in 2007, I got to be part of the first Canada versus USA game. And that's that picture in the top left-hand corner. Now, it's a little bit fuzzy and it's a little bit small, but the reason for that is because I'm actually wearing a USA jersey in that picture. And this is because at the time, there was so few women playing para ice hockey across Canada and the USA that we needed to loan a few athletes to the USA, and I was one of those athletes. So, but as you can see, the sport itself, both in Canada and worldwide, has really been growing. You can see that in 2010, we had a much larger formed team. And the pictures to the right are more recent pictures where we have a 15 to 18 athlete rostered team. We have an entire amazing group of coaches, as well as team staff, physiotherapists, sports psychologists, and they're all volunteering their time to help support our women's national team. Now, I've also been able to roster to a few other teams. So I spent many years in British Columbia, and so I managed to roster to a co-ed team called Team BC, which has participated in the national championships for the past 4 or 5 years. And really, when I think about my experiences within para sports, some of this really started at camp, where I had the opportunity to try lots and lots of different sports. I started to realize how enjoyable sport can be. And I also really enjoyed some of the competition and competitive pieces. And really, when I think about how lucky I am to have gotten involved in sport, it really has helped my leadership skills. It's given me the opportunity to travel, which when I was quite young felt very intimidating, but traveling as part of a team and having lots of supports, I'm now someone who feels very comfortable with navigating airports around the world with a wheelchair and a sledge and a wheelchair basketball chair all at the same time. And these are skills that I learned through my involvement in these team sports. Now, I absolutely love sledge hockey, and I'd love to take any other questions that you have regarding it. But I also wanted to talk a little bit about some of the other sports that I've been involved in, because I think it's really important to try out lots of different sports and see what it is that you like. And so over the years, I've been involved in playing floorball, which is a very cool sport, mostly played in Europe. It looks a lot like wheelchair hockey or floor hockey, but it actually is a little bit similar to soccer as well. And so this sport is played quite heavily within the European sports world. And this is a picture here where I was able to represent Canada in the Netherlands and really enjoyed that sport a lot. Currently, I'm playing wheelchair basketball in Scotland. So this picture on the bottom right is our women's Scottish wheelchair basketball team, which I really enjoy. And I've also been trying some different solo sports that are not so team-based. So I've been excited about rowing, and I've also been doing a lot of wheeling. And so that's a picture a couple years back where I wheeled a half marathon in my day chair. And so I just wanted to also touch base on some of these other sports, because being involved in diverse sporting opportunities was also really important for my development and my enjoyment. Although I have to say para ice hockey is still my favorite, for the record. And so Ben in his introduction did a great job at mentioning that para ice hockey on the women's side is not currently a Paralympic sport. And so right now, what we're doing is doing a lot of work internationally to try and get more national teams for the women's side. And so we're hoping that if we can continue to develop women's sledge hockey around the world, that we're aiming to be a part of the Paralympics in 2026. And so that's our goal. But right now, it is very much dependent on our ability to get teams from multiple countries and multiple continents to roster teams so that we have lots of teams to be able to play against in the Paralympic setting. And so I talked a lot about being an athlete, and more recently, I've really enjoyed taking on more coaching and facilitating roles. And so here's a few different pictures from some of my assisting and coaching experiences. And so on the top left here, you can see that I was involved in running several different para ice hockey programs in British Columbia, where para ice hockey isn't as developed. And so I really enjoyed taking on a coaching role, both with athletes that were younger as well as women. And so this bottom picture is all women playing para ice hockey within BC. Now, more recently, I've moved to the UK, and the UK has a Great Britain para ice hockey team that participates in Pool B at the IPC World Cup level. And I was really lucky enough to, about a year and a half ago, to start coaching with them. And so I'm currently an assistant coach of the GB men's national team. And I was lucky enough to go to the recent World Cup. And I've really found this very rewarding to continue to support athletes, both at the grassroots level, female athletes, as well as elite athletes through their para ice hockey experiences. And so that's been something that's been really rewarding for me recently, especially as I get a little bit older and potentially may not have another 10 years of para ice hockey under my belt, maybe 6. So the other thing I wanted to touch base on is my career. And so you probably noticed I moved around quite a bit. It seemed like I played for a lot of different para ice hockey teams, et cetera. Part of the reasons for that was because I decided that I was really interested in science, and specifically neuroscience, which is the science of your brain and spinal cord. And so when I was making a decision after high school to go to university, I decided I was really interested in the brain and the spinal cord and how it worked and what goes wrong in different disease settings, for example. And so this picture on the left-hand, top left, is really kind of what my day-to-day life looks like. I work in what we would call a wet lab, where we work with cells in dishes, and we do lots of science that will probably remind you of CSI type science. But I did, after my undergraduate degree, decide that I was interested in doing a PhD. And so a PhD basically means you're becoming a specialist in something that is very special. That was my good example, eh? So it's often something where, you know, a question hasn't been asked and you are wanting to define and clarify and answer questions that are outside of what's known already. And if you do that for many, many years, you are awarded with a PhD. And I chose to do my PhD training in Vancouver, which is what took me out to British Columbia. Now, this picture on the right-hand side is a great example of a lot of the communication that I need to do for science. And so I spend a lot of time going to conferences and explaining my work to other scientists, as well as the community, because those are really important pieces. And so much of my training has been looking at cells, if that makes sense. But I have had also the opportunity to work with humans in different research settings. And so these bottom two pictures are pictures of me and having the opportunity to go to Sochi for the Olympics and the Paralympics. And I had the opportunity to be able to test Paralympic athletes and look at the health of their heart and look at how their heart function may affect their ability to participate in their given sports. And so that was a very cool opportunity that came and allowed me to work with people with spinal cord injuries, for example, and Paralympic athletes, and took me away from just looking at cells in a dish under a microscope. And so just to share a little bit about the research that I do. So as Ben introduced, I am interested in spinal cord injury, and I'm also interested in multiple sclerosis, or MS. And so both of these disorders affect your brain and spinal cord. Well, let me clarify. Spinal cord injury is usually an injury that takes place. Often it's traumatic, so from a motor vehicle accidents, for example. But you can also have non-traumatic spinal cord injuries. And this specifically affects a very localized part of the spinal cord. Now, in comparison, multiple sclerosis, which usually has an onset in your 20s to 40s, actually creates lesions all over the brain and spinal cord, so at multiple different levels. And I'm interested in both of these disorders and why it is that our cells don't repair themselves better. So why do we have sustained damage that causes deficit in our motor and sensory systems? And so you can see that there's lots of cells here to the right-hand side. And what I'm really interested in doing is better understanding each of these individual cells and why they don't function as well in the context of either a spinal cord injury or multiple sclerosis. And we have lots of really cool tools to do this. But as I mentioned earlier, I spend a lot of my time on microscopes. And so this is a video that will give you an example of how we can label some of these individual cells and understand the shape of them, understand what they do and how they respond to an injury or a lesion of different kinds. And you can see that in these fancy microscopes, we can actually get a lot of information about how these cells are functioning, how they're interacting with other cells, why it is that they might be damaged. And it gives us a very cool tool to be able to test different treatments. So for example, if we test a certain drug, does that help these cells to do a better job at repairing? Or if we transplant in a new cell type, does it affect these cells and allow for better repair? And so that's what I spend a lot of my time doing. And that's why I'm here in Edinburgh in Scotland, currently doing what we call a postdoc. So it's research that you do after you've got your PhD. And right now I'm particularly interested in multiple sclerosis research. And so that's a quick run through of some of the things that I've been doing and been up to since my years at camp. And I'd be really happy to take any questions that you might have. And thanks again for taking the time to learn about some of my interests and my excitements, both in the sport world and in the science world.
Great. Thank you, Peggy. From sport to science, you truly are an incredible person to have join with us today at Camp Easter Seals. But we do have a few questions that I've seen in the comments, and our first one is from Sarah, who asks, what was one specific time when growing up or now in your career that you had to overcome adversity, and what advice would you give to people living with a physical disability?
That is a great question. And I would say that to be honest with you, I've had to overcome adversity at multiple different stages. But I think when I look back on it, I've become much better at advocating for myself and what it is that I need, and being quite stern about my requirements in order to, do my job or to get access to my sports, etc. A really good example of a big barrier that I've had to overcome is actually moving to Europe. So I have been really, I've grown up in a Canadian system for the most part, and I was quite surprised at how inaccessible Europe is and how difficult it is to navigate the streets, to navigate public transit, those kind of aspects, as well as to navigate the university here where I'm now working. And so I've had to have a lot of dialogues and applying for grants in order to get money for, assistive devices, to get assistance for transportation, to make sure that I can get into buildings where lectures are. And a lot of that does take a lot of energy, I would argue, but at the same time, I've really developed these skills over the years, and they started when I was quite young, probably around the time that I was at camp and doing my undergraduate degree, where I just had to have the conversations with the right people to say, this is what I would like to do, and I would love to chat with you about how to make it possible. And there was definitely frustrating times, but there was also lots of successes and lots of people that I found that were willing to help sort out my concerns and remove barriers so that I could, really obtain the goals that I was interested in.
Great. We have another question from Casey, who asks, what has been your most memorable moment on the ice?
Perfect. So for me, about 2 years ago, the Canadian women's national team, had a very important series against the USA. And same as stand-up hockey, Canada and USA are quite evenly matched, and we're rivals, and we trade back and forth, coming out on top. And there was a really amazing moment on the ice, and we were in Minnesota, in which we managed to beat the USA in our first 2 games of the series. And we had had a lot of adversity as a team that year, and it was just the most exciting moment that I can think of, to see all the hard work and all the sacrifices that our women's national team has made, and our individual athletes, to really come out on top was an incredible moment. And so I think that would be that moment for me.
Great. We have a question from Everett, who asks, when have you gone to Marywood? And knowing Everett, he likely wants to know, what was Marywood like when you were there?
Perfect. So I recognize the dining hall, I think, that Ben is sitting in right now. And so when I was a camper, it was around the time that they were making new cabins. And so there was some construction that took place between when I was a camper and when I was back there as a counselor. But I actually haven't been back in the last 7 or 8 years, so I wouldn't be able to compare it. I would have loved to come back for different little events here and there, but because I've spent most of my last 10 years of my life either living in Vancouver or in Scotland, that's been difficult for me. But it's on my list of things to do if I can get back to Ontario, to go and check it out and see all the changes that have taken place since I've been gone.
So sorry, do you mind just clarifying what years you were at camp?
Ooh, that is going to be difficult for me. A very long time ago. I believe it was probably, I should have looked this up. It was probably 2008 to 2000 and, you know what? It was a 7-year span, and I don't know the exact dates. I would say, yeah, I actually don't know. These are great questions you're throwing at me right at the moment. How about I will update Ben, and he can update you guys later in the week.
Absolutely, be happy to. And of course, you're always welcome to come back and come to camp, as you said that was on your list of things to do. While we wait for more questions to be asked in the YouTube comments, I'd like to ask a question, maybe on behalf of the campers, and that is, Peggy, from science to sport to your life outside of your career, you seem to have it all semi figured out. What advice may you have for someone who's entering adulthood, who may not have an idea of what they have figured out, and if you always knew that you were going to become a neuroscientist?
Perfect. So the first thing I would say is to do things that you love. I would absolutely say I had no idea what my future was going to hold at any point along the way. I often just did the things I really enjoyed doing. I was always really interested in answering questions, and so going towards science seemed like a good solution for that. But even as an example, I had no idea out of high school what I wanted to do. A part of me wanted to make film, and a part of me was interested in rocks, and a part of me was interested in the brain and how the brain perceives the world. And I just looked at my opportunities I had in front of me, and I chose a door. And it may not have been the right door to choose, but at the time it was what fit my life. And looking back, I'm really glad that I went in that direction. And that's kind of the way I've approached my life, is to do the things that I really enjoy, try and keep as many opportunities open as possible. And when I get to a point where I need to make a decision, I make a decision and try out that path. And you can always go and try something different. There's lots of people who change their careers, they change their sport, they change lots of different things about their lives. And that's an important piece to making sure that you're happy and doing the things that you want at any given time in your life. So
Great. We have another question from Everett, who wants to know, when you were at camp, was there a slice? So the slice is the cabin trophy that's awarded every session to the winning cabin. Was that around when you were
I
at camp?
don't think it was, because I don't have a memory of this, and I feel like I would have. So I probably was there before the slice.
I'll go grab it. I'll
Okay,
see if
I'd like
it refreshes.
Perfect.
Let's see. Was this around?
Wow.
Let's see. The last date was 2007. It may help you with dates.
Oh, that will help me a lot. So I don't think that was around. So I may have finished in 2007. That seems like a good answer. Maybe 2006. Cool.
Very good. As I don't see, I just put out a last call for questions in the YouTube chat. So maybe some more will come in, but in the meantime, maybe Peggy, you can talk about what you're up to, what's the quarantine situation in Scotland, and what are your plans for the future. You talked a lot about your story. What about what you foresee for yourself moving forward?
Yeah, for sure. So living in the UK during the pandemic and lockdown has been a very different experience for me. It has made me miss Canada a lot and feel like Canada is quite far away. I am mostly working from my house these days and starting to transition back to work in a lab setting. So that is great to be able to starting to get back to some form of normal. Training has been really difficult for me because getting access to ice has obviously been almost impossible. So I've been relearning how to train and do exercises within my house, which has been a really great experience. Managed to get some equipment in my house so that I can do different exercises and try and stay as fit as I possibly can during this time from an athlete standpoint. Now, right now, I'm in Scotland working on what I'd call my postdoc. So it's an important piece of research that I'm hoping to publish. And once I publish it, it will give me hopefully the opportunity to be able to come back to Canada and potentially get a role doing research within the Canadian system, which is what I'd really like to do. I'm very passionate about better understanding what happens in the context of spinal cord injury, likely because of my own experiences, but also in the context of MS, which is a very common disease, especially in Canada as well as in Scotland. And so I'm hoping that I might be able to work at a university and be able to do research in my day life, but also still be involved in lots of different sports in my evenings and weekends. So I think that would be what the perfect future would look like. But as we all know, it could change, and I'll keep everybody updated.
That's great. Thank you, Peggy. I think that brings us to the end of this amazing session with you. On behalf of everyone here at Easter Seals Camp, thank you for joining us today. It's been a pleasure talking to you and welcoming you back to camp, although it's virtually, and all of the insights that you offered us certainly will benefit our community. And so on behalf of us and the campers here at Camp Easter Seals, we thank you for joining us.
Perfect. And thank you so much for having me. It's been amazing feeling like I'm back at camp for even a short period of time. So good luck with the rest of everybody's sessions.